Johnny Carson was telling a joke. The audience was laughing. Then someone said, "Johnny, it's me." And Carson's face completely changed. He recognized that voice, but it was impossible. The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. November 1978. Studio One at NBC in Burbank. Another Tuesday night. Another monologue. Another 300 people in the audience expecting laughs and celebrity banter, and Ed McMahon's booming voice. Johnny stood behind his desk in his signature suit, shuffling his blue cue cards, delivering a joke about President Carter with perfect timing. The audience laughed. Ed chuckled beside him. Doc Severinsen and the band waited for their cue to play bumper music. Everything was routine. Everything was safe. Everything was exactly what America expected when they tuned in at 11:30 p.m. Until a voice called out from the fourth row. "Johnny!" Not loud. Not a shout. Just a single word, spoken with such quiet intensity that it cut through the laughter like a knife. Johnny stopped mid-sentence. His smile froze. His hand, which had been gesturing toward the camera, dropped to his side. The cue card he was holding slipped from his fingers and fluttered to the desk. The audience's laughter died instantly. 300 people sensing something had shifted, something had broken in the carefully orchestrated rhythm of late-night television. "Johnny, it's me." The voice came again. Still quiet. Still from somewhere in the audience. Johnny's entire body went rigid. His eyes scanned the crowd, searching. His face had gone pale, the professional mask completely gone, replaced by something raw and unguarded. Ed McMahon leaned forward in his chair. "Johnny? You okay, Pally?" Johnny didn't respond. He was staring at the audience, at a man standing in the fourth row. An older man, maybe late 50s, wearing a worn jacket and leaning heavily on the seat in front of him. His face was weathered, lined with years. But his eyes were young and full of tears. Carson stopped mid-monologue. The entire studio froze. The control room erupted into confusion. Director Bobby Quinn shouted into his headset. "What's happening? Why did he stop? Do we cut? Do we go to commercial?" Producer Fred DeCordova stood frozen behind Bobby, staring at the monitors, watching Johnny Carson, who never broke character, who never lost his composure, who was the consummate professional, standing motionless behind his desk, staring at someone in the audience. "Keep rolling," Fred said quietly. "Don't cut. Something's happening." On stage, Johnny took a step forward. Then another. He walked around his desk, something he rarely did during the monologue, and moved toward the edge of the stage, toward the audience. "Tommy?" Johnny's voice was barely above a whisper, but the studio microphones caught every syllable. "Tommy Sullivan?" The man in the fourth row nodded, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Yeah, Johnny. It's me." The audience gasped. Not the excited gasp of a surprise celebrity appearance. Something deeper. Something that carried the weight of history nobody in that room understood yet. Johnny gripped the edge of the stage. His knuckles went white. "You're dead. They told me you were dead." Tommy Sullivan smiled through his tears. "Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated." The studio was completely silent. Even Doc Severinsen had lowered his trumpet, staring at this moment unfolding. Johnny looked back at Ed, then at the cameras, then at Tommy again. How are you here? How are you alive?" "It's a long story, Johnny. But I've been trying to find you for 6 months. And then I saw you were doing a special taping audience ticket giveaway, and I thought, maybe this is how I get to see you again." Johnny's jaw clenched. He was fighting tears, fighting to maintain some semblance of control, but losing the battle with every passing second. "Ladies and gentlemen," Johnny said, his voice thick, addressing both the studio audience and the millions watching at home, I need to stop the show for a minute. I need to tell you about Tommy Sullivan." He gestured to the band. "Doc, don't play. Everybody just hold on. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened in 1945. Johnny Carson wasn't always Johnny Carson, king of late-night television. In 1945, he was a 19-year-old ensign in the United States Navy, stationed on the USS Pennsylvania, a battleship that had survived Pearl Harbor and fought its way across the Pacific. His best friend was Tommy Sullivan, a gunner's mate from Boston who was 20 years old and talked constantly about the girl he was going to marry when they got home, about the house they'd buy in Dorchester, about the kids they'd have. They were assigned to the same gun crew. They bunked near each other. They wrote letters home sitting side by side on the deck during rare quiet moments. They shared cigarettes and coffee and the kind of friendship that forms when you're young and scared and far from home. On August 12, 1945, 3 days before Japan would surrender, the USS Pennsylvania was hit by a Japanese torpedo while anchored in Buckner Bay, Okinawa. The explosion tore through the stern. 20 men died instantly. Dozens more were wounded. The ship was listing, taking on water, chaos and fire and screaming everywhere. Johnny had been below deck when the torpedo hit. He'd been thrown against a bulkhead, knocked unconscious. When he came to, the compartment was flooding. He could hear men shouting, metal groaning, the terrible sounds of a ship dying. He made it topside through smoke and darkness, his ears ringing, blood running from a gash on his forehead. The deck was chaos. Sailors fighting fires, medics treating the wounded, officers screaming orders. Johnny found his gun crew. Or what was left of it. 3 men dead. 2 badly wounded. And Tommy Sullivan was nowhere to be seen. He went back down, one of the survivors said, his voice shaking. There were men trapped below. Tommy went back down to get them. Johnny tried to follow. An officer grabbed him, held him back. The compartment's flooded, sailor. Anyone down there is gone. They pulled 4 bodies from that compartment over the next 2 days. Tommy Sullivan wasn't one of them. The official report listed him as lost at sea, presumed dead. Johnny Carson came home from the war carrying survivor's guilt that would haunt him for decades. He never talked about Tommy Sullivan. Not to his first wife. Not to his children. Not to Ed McMahon, who became his closest friend 30 years later. He built his career, became famous, made millions of people laugh every night. But a part of him stayed 19 years old, standing on that burning deck, watching his best friend disappear into smoke and water. Until November 1978, when Tommy Sullivan stood up in the 4th row of the Tonight Show audience and said his name. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Johnny walked down the steps from the stage into the audience. Security guards started to move forward, uncertain what was happening, but Ed McMahon stood up and gestured them back. This wasn't a security situation. This was something else entirely. Johnny made his way up the aisle to the 4th row. Tommy Sullivan stood there, one hand gripping the seat for support, his legs clearly giving him trouble. Johnny stopped in front of him, staring at his face, trying to reconcile the 20-year-old sailor he remembered with this weathered man in his late 50s. How? Johnny's voice cracked. How are you alive? They said you drowned? They said the compartment was flooded. They pulled bodies out and you weren't. I was trapped, Tommy said, his voice rough with emotion. In an air pocket. I was down there for 6 hours before rescue crews found me. By the time they pulled me out, the ship had been evacuated. The casualty lists had already been filed. I was unconscious for 3 days in a field hospital. When I woke up, the war was over, and everyone had already shipped home. Johnny was crying now, not even trying to hide it. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment. I tried to find you, Tommy continued. I wrote letters to your parents' address in Nebraska. They came back undeliverable. You'd already moved away. I had no way to track you down. And then my life got complicated. He pulled up his pant leg slightly, revealing a prosthetic. Lost this in Korea? 5 years after I survived the Pennsylvania. Spent 2 years in VA hospitals. By the time I got out, you were already on television, already famous. And I thought, how do I just show up after all these years? How do I walk back into Johnny Carson's life when he's moved on? You stupid son of a bitch, Johnny said, but he was smiling through his tears. You stupid, stubborn son of a bitch. You should have found me. You should have. He pulled Tommy into a fierce embrace. Tommy's cane clattered to the floor. The two men held each other, 63-year-old and 53-year-old versions of the 19- and 20-year-olds who'd been best friends on a battleship 33 years ago. The audience erupted. Not in applause yet, that would come later. In that collective sound of 300 people witnessing something profound and real breaking through the artifice of television. Backstage, he made a choice no producer would have ever allowed. When Johnny and Tommy finally separated, Johnny wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. He looked at the audience, then at the cameras. Folks, I'm going to do something I've never done in 16 years of hosting this show. We're not going to continue with the scheduled program tonight. We're going to sit down, Tommy and I, and we're going to talk. Really talk. About the war. About what happened. About 33 years of not knowing if your best friend was alive or dead. He looked at Fred de Cordova in the control room, knowing Fred could hear him through the monitors. Fred, clear the rest of the show. Cancel the other guests. This is what we're doing tonight. In the control room, Fred hesitated for exactly 3 seconds. Then he nodded to Bobby. Do it. Clear everything. Johnny helped Tommy down to the stage, retrieving his cane, supporting him as they walked. Ed McMahon had already moved the desk setup, positioning 2 chairs facing each other, creating an intimate space. The band played softly, not comedy music, but something gentle and respectful. Doc Severinsen knew without being told what this moment needed. Johnny and Tommy sat down facing each other. Johnny reached into his desk drawer and pulled out something small, a photograph, old and worn at the edges. I've carried this for 33 years, Johnny said, showing it to Tommy. The image of 2 young sailors in uniform, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera. Johnny at 19. Tommy at 20. Taken on the deck of the USS Pennsylvania, 3 weeks before the torpedo. Tommy stared at the photograph, his hand trembling as he took it. I had one just like this. Lost it somewhere along the way. All those years in hospitals and moving around. I lost track of so much. Johnny leaned forward. Tell me about that day. Tell me what happened when you went back down. For the next 40 minutes, The Tonight Show became something America had never seen before. Tommy told his story, the flooded compartment, the trapped sailors, the 6 hours in darkness waiting for rescue. Johnny talked about the guilt he'd carried, the nightmares, the way he built walls around that part of his life. The audience sat in complete silence, bearing witness. No one left for bathroom breaks. No one whispered. They understood they were watching television history, the night Johnny Carson stopped being an entertainer and became simply a man confronting his past. But this was the moment no one in the studio, nor anyone at home, ever saw coming. Near the end of their conversation, Johnny did something unprecedented. He stood up, took off his suit jacket, and draped it over Tommy's shoulders. This jacket, Johnny said, his voice steady now, has been on this show for 3 years. I've worn it for hundreds of monologues. Thousands of jokes. But tonight, it means something different. Tommy, I want you to have it. Because you taught me something in 1945 that I forgot. Real courage isn't making people laugh. It's going back into the darkness to save someone else. Tommy clutched the jacket, tears streaming down his face. The audience rose as one, applauding not with excitement but with reverence. Johnny looked directly into the camera. If you're watching this and you've lost touch with someone from your past, someone who mattered, find them. Don't wait 33 years like I did. Don't assume it's too late. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. After the show, Johnny arranged for Tommy to receive full medical care through connections he'd built over the years. Tommy moved to Los Angeles. They had dinner every month until Johnny retired in 1992. The photograph of two young sailors stayed on Johnny's desk until his final show. Today it's in the Smithsonian, next to the jacket Tommy wore that night, a reminder that sometimes the best television happens when someone stops performing and starts being human.